Hi everyone, this is a video guide on how to operate the UV spectrophotometer. First things first, open the lid to ensure that the cuvette slot of the machine is empty. Next, turn on the UV spectrophotometer by hitting the power switch at the back of the machine. The machine will go through the mandatory checks before we can use it. Once the checks are done, you will be brought to the mode menu. Most students will only be using the first two modes of the machine, which are photometric as well as spectrum. If you are the first person to boot up the machine, you will need to run the baseline correct procedure. Press 2 for the spectrum mode. Ensure that the wavelength covers the visible light range of 800 nanometers to 400 nanometers. A suitable wavelength range to use is 1100 to 190 nanometers. If you need to edit the wavelength, press 2 and input the wavelength of 1100 to 190 nanometers. Be sure to hit enter. Fill up a cuvette with distilled water. Ensure that the frosted side is facing you, as the light ray will be traveling from right to left. Insert the cuvette into the cuvette slot. Press F1 to begin the baseline correct procedure. The machine will take approximately 10 minutes to complete the procedure, as it runs through the entire wavelength range. Once it is done, you will hear a beep. The next step is to determine what wavelength you will be using. One method is to use the color wheel that is provided. If your solution is green in color, use the range that is opposite of the color green. This would mean that you should use a wavelength range between 650 to 750 nanometers. Please keep in mind that this method is the least accurate among the three that will be described. The next method is to read up on journals or research papers that have the similar experimental procedures as your experiment. Use the same wavelength that is stated in those journals or papers that you have found. The last method is to use the spectrum mode of the machine. Fill up a cuvette with your sample and insert it into the cuvette slot. Press start on the machine. The machine will plot a graph as seen on the screen. If you are using the 1240 model, press F2 for the peak option. In this scenario, your wavelength of choice should be 738 nanometers, as the absorbance is below 1. If you are uncertain, take a picture of the peak detection screen and consult your teacher or the lab technician. If you are using the UV1280 model, you will be greeted with this screen instead. Press F2 for the data processing option. Press 3 for peak. The ideal wavelength in this scenario is 740 nanometers, as the absorbance is below 1 and is within the visible wavelength range of 800 to 400 nanometers. Now that you have found the wavelength that you should be using, press return to the mode menu. There will be no need to save the data, therefore click OK when the delete data option pops up. Next, press 1 for the photometric option. You will now need to run the auto zero procedure. The auto zero procedure must be done every time the wavelength is changed. Press the Go to WL option to change the wavelength to the wavelength of your choice. Input the desired wavelength and press Enter. Place a cuvette with distilled water into the cuvette slot. Next, press the Auto Zero button. It should only take 10 seconds and it will end with a beep. The absorbance should be close to zero. Now swap out the cuvette with a cuvette of your sample. There will be no need to press any buttons as the machine will tell you the absorbance of the sample at your desired wavelength. You can now swap out the cuvettes for other cuvettes of your samples. Please ensure that you switch off the machine at the end of the day. Thank you.